Well, good morning. Welcome to June. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to go ahead and read our Bible reading in Matthew 28, and we're going to start with that. So let me read Matthew 28, verses 8 through 15. This is what it says. So they, and I guess I should pause there, they is Mary and Mary, excuse me, Mary Magdalene, and then another Mary. It says in Luke it says it's the mother of James. And so these two Marys had ran to the tomb, and they found that the tomb was empty, and the angel had talked to them. Okay, so they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers, and said, "Tell people, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed, and this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. So we see here in these verses and in all the parallel passages in the other Gospels that Mary and Mary were the first ones to the tomb, and they had gone to take spices, and they find it empty, and they run back and tell the disciples. And we know that Peter runs to the tomb to check for himself. In our parallel passage this morning, or not necessarily parallel, but in our other reading, Luke 24, it talks about Jesus appearing to two disciples on the road to Emmaus. Not the 12 apostles, but two other disciples that had been following Jesus, and then of course they run back and tell the disciples after their encounter with Jesus as well. And so I find it interesting that Jesus chooses to reveal himself to Mary and to these two other disciples, and it seems that the 12 apostles are not his first choice to appear to, and I kind of wondered why that is. And I don't know. We don't know why Jesus chose to appear to others first, but it just seemed interesting that Jesus didn't appear to the 12 first. It's not that he kind of like, he didn't dodge the visit to them, but he delayed it. He didn't go to them first. It was, they had to trust what others were saying. And we see that in our Luke 24 reading, that they were starting to believe, but even when Jesus appeared to them, they still weren't fully convinced, or they had doubts, and Jesus explained everything to them. And so really what I want to talk about today is just steps of faith, right? God asks us to take steps of faith. And I think that's what he was doing with the disciples here. They had struggled to follow Jesus. We know that they walked with him, but they weren't fully committed. We see them all abandon him when he goes to the cross. They didn't know what to do when the trouble actually came, and they didn't have their leader anymore. They didn't have their teacher. And so I see Jesus asking them to take steps of faith by appearing to others first and asking them to trust their word. And then, of course, Jesus does appear to them, and eventually he appears to 500, and we believe, some of the theologians believe that took place back north in Galilee. That's what 1 Corinthians 15 says. He appears to the 500. And we know that they wind up in Galilee at some point because Peter's back fishing at the Sea of Galilee, and that's where Jesus restores Peter. And so even though the first appearance to the 12 apostles is in Jerusalem, they still had to make a trek back north at some point. And Jesus asked them to go up there, and then he had appeared to them again. And so there's just these steps of faith that the apostles had to take. And I don't think it was to show that they were committed. I think it was just for God to ask them, for Jesus to ask them to trust him. And then as they do that, as they step out of their comfort zone, God rewards that, and they grow in their faith, and Jesus restores Peter. And I believe that that's the same truth in our lives today. We can either get to a place where we're comfortable in our relationship with Jesus and we become stagnant and stale, or we can continue to grow. We continue to take steps out of our comfort zone. I often challenge the youth that if they want to grow, they need to take steps out of their comfort zone. And recently, God has been challenging me that, hey, I can't just challenge the youth to step out of their comfort zone. I need to be willing to do that too. And that's hard for me because I'm a guy who's just can build get into something and just stay in that routine, and then that routine can become a rut. We need to be willing to continually step out of our comfort zone. God shows up when we do that, and we grow in our faith. And so I've seen youth, and I'm not going to use any names because I didn't ask them to talk about this, but I've seen one of our students who really didn't want to go to Mexico and was nervous about it, didn't necessarily like the idea, doesn't like to travel, but willingly took the step to go. And God showed up in big ways in their life, and now it's something they look forward to every year. And they had a profound growth in their life from that trip. So they took that step out of their comfort zone. I think of another one who, when we were meeting before school for Bible study, a small group of us, one of them just felt that God was asking them to share their story, their testimony, and they hadn't really done that with anybody yet. And so it was a big step for them. It was hard to do. And yet they took that step out of their comfort zone to share their story with us. And again, I saw God show up in big ways because of that. It was a neat experience, neat opportunity. I've seen our youth take steps of faith in getting baptized, right? That trust and obedience to what God has asked of us. And they responded by getting baptized. And so I've been encouraged by the way many of our youth have taken steps out of their comfort zone, and it has challenged me in my own life. And so that's the challenge to you today. Be comfortable or grow, right? And when we were comfortable, our faith becomes stale and stagnant. We have to continue to grow. And so we have to continue to take steps out of our comfort zone and things that are not easy for us, because in that we have faith in God. And so think about the disciples. Think about the choices that they made. When we look at Psalm 7, verse 1, which was also in our reading today, it says this: O Lord my God, in you do I take refuge. Save me from all my pursuers and deliver me, lest like a lion they tear my soul apart, rending it in pieces with none to deliver. And that's the choice we need to take. Be safe or take refuge in God so the world doesn't tear us apart. And that's what the disciples had to do. They took faith in God and they trusted him. And so before the crucifixion and Jesus' reappearance to the disciples, they ran away, right? They abandoned Jesus when he went to the cross. And yet after Jesus appeared to them and then ascended to heaven, we know that 11 out of the 12 apostles, 10 out of 11, Judas was no longer with them, but 10 out of 11 were martyred. They were killed for their faith, so they no longer abandoned God. There was this drastic change, right? They took steps out of their comfort zone and they grew. Before Jesus went to the cross, the night in the garden, the disciples fell asleep 3 times during prayer. Jesus kept coming back and waking them up. Hey, how come you're asleep? Wake up, pray. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't focus. They couldn't stay awake. And yet, after Jesus appeared and then ascended, we find them in Acts 1:4, devoted to prayer. And all throughout Acts, especially at the beginning, you'll see multiple references to the disciples spending much time in prayer and devoting themselves to prayer. So again, this big change. Before Jesus was crucified, lots of questions, lots of misunderstanding from the disciples. They don't know. They ask questions. They're confused. But after Jesus died and then ascended, now we see them full of power and authority. We don't find a lot of questions in Acts. We find them full of power and authority and just boldly proclaiming the gospel. And we're seeing this change in the disciples, and that change needs to take place in our life too, where we go from being complacent and content to continually stepping out of our comfort zone and growing in faith. Or we become, and we haven't even talked about this yet, the rest of our reading in Matthew 28, we become like the chief priests who couldn't accept what happened, and so they had to make up lies. And so they become like those in verse 14 in Psalm 7, which says, Behold, the wicked man conceives evil and is pregnant with mischief and gives birth to lies. He makes a pit, digging it out, and falls into the hole that he has made. And so we see... right? This is what the chief priests do. They don't trust that Jesus is risen, so they have to make up lies. Hey, they tell the soldiers, go say the disciples stole Jesus out of the tomb. Spread this lie so no one believes that Jesus actually rose from the dead. They can't come to grips. They come to that moment where they could step out of their comfort zone, recognize they're wrong, and trust God, and yet they don't, and they make up lies. And so that's our choice today. Be complacent or grow. And I hope that you will continue to allow God to grow you and to speak into your life, and you will take steps out of your comfort zone, no matter how hard or uncomfortable it is. Because when we do that, God shows up in mighty and powerful ways. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. God bless.